You're listening to Long Distance. I'm Paola Mardo. I grew up writing stories, watching movies, wanting to make movies and write stories, things like that. I didn't grow up with podcasts because, surprise, they didn't exist yet. But I also didn't grow up with radio because I spent most of my childhood in the Philippines, where we had, music radio. Not the kind of public radio that we have here in the US that supports narrative storytelling, like the kind you hear on other narrative podcasts and on Long Distance. If I did, maybe I'd have started making podcasts at age 10 or whatever. My first podcast was an interview show. I started it in 2015, and it was called F This Weekly, a podcast featuring interviews and stories with women of color in the arts and entertainment. Of course, there is an episode in which I interview Patrick Epino, my producer, partner, whatever. It's about his Asian hair problems. Anyway, when I finally embarked on making a narrative podcast, it was around 2016. I started interviewing folks in LA's historic Filipino town community, thinking I'd make some kind of audio project about the stories I was recording. But then, I kind of took a detour because I somehow stumbled into a little-known, very interesting piece of information, which turned into an almost year-long investigation of sorts and a thesis podcast I produced in journalism school, plus an episode produced on another podcast, as well as other things I wrote and made along the way. That thing I found out was that Filipinos served as the original bartenders of LA's tiki bars. You might have heard of tiki bars. Maybe you've even been to one. They're those tropical taverns that serve kitschy cocktails like Mai Tais and Scorpion Bowls. And I found out that not only were tiki bars invented in Los Angeles, one of the oldest tiki bars here was started by a Filipino tiki bartender. His name is Ray Buhin. His bar is the Tiki Ti. It opened in 1961, and it's still around. It's sort of an LA institution, really. Ray started mixing tiki drinks back in the 1930s when he arrived as an immigrant from the Philippines. The story you're about to hear is about Ray and the Filipino tiki bartenders, but it's also about tiki bars, LA and Hawaii, and the appropriation and appreciation of Pacific Islander culture. All that on this episode, Filipino Tiki Bar. There's an old bar in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard just east of Hollywood. From the outside, it looks like just another hole-in-the-wall dive, except for a few things. Tropical knickknacks hanging from the ceiling, patrons in Hawaiian shirts holding funny-shaped mugs, and a big sign above the front door that spells the bar's name, Tiki Ti. Next to it, the head of a wooden tiki, the icon for the ever-popular tiki bar. Inside, customers sip on colorful cocktails like the Mai Tai and the Zombie. I asked them what it is that brought them here in the first place.
So you walk into a tiki bar and it's not like any other bar. And the people that are there are usually there because they want to have fun and they want to enjoy some tropical drinks and they want a little escape.
It reminds you of being somewhere warm and tropical.
It's just kind of like old school Americana.
I like the island theme. I'm Filipino, so I'm kind of biased.
I like that there's weird stuff everywhere. All these guys have on Hawaiian shirts.
Do you go to tiki bars a lot?
I do. This is my second time here this week.
Oh, wow. What is it about tiki bars that you like?
I think Don the Beachcomber said that if you can't go to paradise, I'll bring paradise to you. And that's sort of how I feel about it.
These folks find a little bit of paradise at the Tiki Ti. It's one of the oldest tiki bars in Los Angeles, and it's still owned by the same family that opened it back in 1961. Mike Buhin is the snow-haired man in the Hawaiian shirt usually smoking a cigar while checking IDs up front.
We're drinking at Ground Zero. We got a legacy that goes way back.
Mike's dad is Ray Buchan. Ray worked his way up through different tiki bars, mixing drinks for Hollywood celebrities and Angelinos for decades. Ray moved to Los Angeles from the Philippines in 1930. As far as I know, he didn't set out to be a tiki bartender, but by the time he opened up his own tiki bar, the Tiki Ti, he was a legend in the Los Angeles tiki scene. In fact, he's a big reason why I started looking into tiki bars in the first place. I'm Filipino American, and I was born in Los Angeles, home to the largest population of Filipino Americans in the United States. But aside from a few street signs and decorations in an area called Historic Filipino Town, there isn't much to show for Filipino history in the city. I've always wanted to know about the first Filipinos who moved here and what life was like for them. I caught a glimpse of this life in the book Filipinos in Hollywood by Karina Montoya. It's got tons of black and white photos of Filipino men, with white women in taxi dance halls, standing in line with other men of color at a movie casting call. It's where I found a photograph of Ray Buchan behind a bamboo bar, serving a crowd of white men and women. Ray looks proud, happy even, as if he's thinking, hey, I'm living the American dream. I wanted to know more about his story, so I spent some time in tiki bars, spent time with Ray's son, with tiki aficionados and experts, with Pacific Islander artists and activists, and what I ended up finding was a lot more than just a little-known chapter in Filipino and American history. The story of tiki touches on a lot of issues we're still struggling with in America today, about the difference between appreciating and appropriating culture, about race and pop culture, and escapism and the American dream. We're going to come back to the story of Ray Buchan later in this episode. First, we need to talk about the history of tiki bars. The very first tiki bar was called Don the Beachcomber, a nautical-themed bar that opened in Hollywood in 1934, 1 year after the repeal of Prohibition. Its founder was a man who went by the name of Don Beach. Don was a character. He loved to party and to travel. He decorated his bar with souvenirs from his many trips to Hawaii and other Polynesian islands. He also rented them to film productions, becoming an advisor for movies set in the South Seas, which were very popular at the time. A little crazy considering the fact that he wasn't a historian and had no real connections to Hawaii or the Pacific. Regardless of Don's qualifications, his bar attracted Hollywood coworkers and celebrity guests, like Charlie Chaplin, Marlene Dietrich, and Howard Hughes. Soon, other tiki bar chains started opening up across the country, like Trader Vic's, where the Mai Tai was invented.
What I learned about tiki bars was that they really arose after World War II, after servicemen came back from the Pacific.
That's Karen Williams, a Cook Islander film producer who works at the New Zealand Film Commission. Years ago, she worked on a film called American Tiki.
Obviously, they'd been in the war and that had been horrible, but they'd also had these great experiences on the beach, at the luau with the hula girls, and they were sort of trying to recreate that in their own world.
By the time Hawaii became the 50th state in 1959, tiki bars expanded into Polynesian-style lounges and restaurants. But they weren't just places to eat and drink. Sven Kirsten, author of Tiki Pop and several books on tiki bars and culture, says that tiki bars were an experience.
Well, the tiki bar experiences really starts with coming from the outside of an urban environment through the doors. Often they would have a little footbridge over a moat with, tiki torches burning, and you would enter
A
different reality.
You're in a South Seas hut or garden. Exotica music plays in the background. The lights are dim. The walls are colorful. There are all sorts of tropical accents like bamboo, rattan, masks, tikis. The exotic sights and sounds tickle your taste buds and your senses. Waiters serve you American Chinese food with pineapple for some Polynesian flavor. But the main course of the tiki bar is its selection of tropical drinks. and there are many to choose from. They're all served in mugs decorated with tikis, skulls, or even topless hula girls. You see, the idea of the tiki bar is to sit in a completely artificial but natural-looking environment where you drink these special cocktails and the place sort of lulls you into this
Illusion that you were in the South Seas.
All right, I know that sounded like a tropical paradise, but didn't it also sound kind of weird? Topless hula girls and skulls? American Chinese food with pineapple for Polynesian flavor? I guess you could call that Asian fusion. By the 1960s, tiki culture was so popular that it touched on everything: movies, music, design, architecture. Think Hawaiian or aloha shirts and leis. A fancy night out was a trip to the local tiki lounge. Backyard luaus were popular as people built their own home tiki bars, complete with tiki torches and mugs, and record players spinning Hawaiian music. By the time the Brady Bunch vacationed in Hawaii and faced the curse of the tiki idol, tiki bars and culture were a bona fide pop culture phenomenon.
Hey, this is my tiki. That's my tiki. I want this tiki. You over that tiki.
Oh, for goodness sake, take any tiki!
I know what you're thinking. Why tiki bars? Why talk about them now? Well, I wanted to know more about Ray Buchan and the story of the Filipino bartenders who worked at these first tiki bars in LA. And tiki bars are actually coming back in a really big way.
There's tiki bars popping up all over the place in big cities and in smaller cities, especially on the West Coast.
That's Catherine Spires, and she's written about tiki bar history and the big tiki resurgence that's happening right now.
And I think part one of that is escapism. The other element is that I think that tiki was really the first mixology.
Catherine says that the original tiki drinks were really good, complicated but not in a fussy way, and layered purposefully. These days, there's a growing respect for the cocktail in America. Just head to your nearest fancy restaurant or bar, and you'll see a cocktail menu about as long as your food menu. You can thank tiki bars for that. But not everyone is happy about this resurgence of all things tiki.
I was born in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, as we call it in the Maori language.
That's the film producer Karen Williams again. We talked over Skype about a tiki bar documentary she started working on when she lived in LA, right around the corner from the Tiki Ti.
I found the whole thing really fairly bizarre. They were Polynesian-themed places, but when you really got down to it, the culture and the history was pretty shallow.
Karen didn't end up making the film, but her research showed that tiki bars enforced a lot of negative stereotypes about Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, so there's a drink that they do in the Tiki Ti, and it's called the Uga Buga. They pour this rum drink, and all the patrons in the bar yell out Uga Buga when they're making this drink. That is really pretty offensive. That is real kind of jungle bunny stuff. That is reinforcing stereotypes of Polynesians as kind of jungle savages, that whole Uga Buga idea. So in New Zealand, the word tiki or hey tiki, these represent actual Polynesian ancestors. The tribes of Polynesia can trace their origins back to these ancestors. So for me, it represents ancestors. They represent spirituality, and old spirituality, which is actually still very much alive today. So, seeing it in a bar is really, in many ways, it's degrading those images and degrading that history.
Tiki's everywhere. I meet Sven Kirsten, author of Tiki Pop, at his home in Los Angeles, which he calls a tiki museum. He's been collecting tiki masks, mugs, figures, and other memorabilia over the last 30 years.
This big tiki here that you see standing there, and some of these lamps came from the Tiki's amusement park. This is my smoking table with my Tiki Ti mugs that I designed.
Sven says he got into what he calls tiki culture in the 1980s, when tiki was already out of style, poo-pooed by the younger generation in the 60s and 70s for being politically incorrect, tacky, kitschy, plastic, and artificial. And that's exactly why Sven was so intrigued.
The artificiality of it all was decried by that generation. In retrospect, for me, the artificiality of it became the cool thing. The Kings actually wrote a song about Waikiki, and they rhymed Waikiki with hula skirts made out of PVC. I love artifice, and I'm always interested by the reinterpretation of a culture by another culture.
Tiki fans like Sven started researching and writing about tiki drinks, music, the overall aesthetic in the 90s. Sven's book Tiki Pop has copies of old tiki bar menus. Here's one of them. It's from a place called the Cannibal Room Cocktail Lounge. First drink on the list, right above the Mai Tai, the Black Woman. A dusky belle from deep in the jungle, sweeter than most, gets along with anything, but favors vodka. Here's another one. The Headhunter Special. You'll lose your head over this one. That's next to a drawing of a brown man in a loincloth. He's holding a bloody head and a big knife. You see, tiki bars became shorthand for what was exotic and foreign to Americans at the time. I asked Sven if he thought tiki bars were, in some way, offensive, inaccurate, an appropriation of Pacific culture.
Well, it's you have to decide for yourself, and I respect people that don't like it. But if you go to a Chinese restaurant, I don't know of any Buddhists that are offended by Buddha statues and illustrations of the goddess Kuan Yin on the menu. It's mythology, but they are a cultural symbol for something. I like going to kitschy Bavarian restaurants like the Red Lion and see all these representations of Germans in lederhosen and with these giant beer mugs, which to somebody like me from northern Germany is absolutely ridiculous because that's not how we run around there. But anything that is a pop culture version of an authentic culture made for entertainment and for recreation is bound to not be authentic. It was never intended to be an insult. It was created out of a love for that culture and a fascination with that culture.
Tiki bars were at the height of their popularity when Hawaii became the 50th state in 1959. Even though tiki bars draw inspiration from many Pacific and Asian cultures, when most people think of tiki bars, they still think of Hawaii. So when America hit peak tiki in the 1950s and 1960s, what did people in Hawaii think? And when did Filipinos actually start making tiki drinks? That's after the break. Hey, Patrick.
Sup?
Guess what?
What?
This is the last episode of Long Distance Season 1. Can you believe it?
Seriously?
I know, right? We're going on a break to jump into production on Season 2. We've been prepping for this for months now, but it's now finally happening and I couldn't be more excited.
Sweet.
But here's the thing. We've been part of this Google Podcast Creator Program with PRX, which gave us seed funding and training to help us further develop Long Distance and to begin production on a second season. Now, we need support from you, our long-distance listeners. Yes, I am talking to you right now, to get us through the production finish line and to make this a truly sustainable podcast.
That means a podcast that will last beyond just Season 2 and into Season 3, 4, 5, and forever.
Exactly.
So, how can our long-distance listeners and their friends and family help?
By joining our Patreon. Patreon is a membership platform where you can support us as we keep working on long distance. And for your help, you'll gain cool membership benefits. We just started it, and you can check it out at patreon.com/longdistanceradio or on our website, longdistanceradio.com. We'll also have more information about our Patreon at the end of this episode, so stick around.
Kind of like the end credits of a Marvel movie?
Sort of. Listen, our dream is to make long distance for you guys forever, and to fund long distance production beyond just one more season. So please, stick around to the very end of this episode, and we'll talk some more about it. And check out patreon.com/longdistanceradio or longdistanceradio.com for more information.
I can't wait.
Thanks for listening. Now, back to the show. So, when the U.S. hit peak tiki in the 50s and 60s, what did people in Hawaii think? And what do they think now? To find out, I spoke with DeSoto Brown, a historian and author of several books on Hawaii history.
Tiki bars really were not tied officially to the Hawaiian Islands. They used Hawaiian elements. They frequently had actual Hawaiian musicians and dancers performing in them, but they were a fantasy amalgamation of elements from a variety of different Pacific and Asian cultures. Well, certainly at the time of the great popularity of tiki bars, people in the Hawaiian Islands accepted them. A lot of people supported them, in fact, because economically they were good for the Hawaiian Islands. They were good for tourism.
That all started to change in the 1970s, during the Hawaiian Renaissance.
Hawaiian people began to really re-examine their identities, their place in American culture.
Along with this reclaiming of identity came criticism about the ways that Hawaiian culture was portrayed, appropriated, or misused.
So today, you are less likely to find a widespread acceptance of a, quote, tiki bar.
DeSoto says the word tiki can be found in different forms in different Polynesian languages. The tiki itself often represents human forms, but it depends on the culture. For example, in the Maori language, in Aotearoa, or New Zealand, the film producer Karen Williams said that tiki, or hei tiki, represents Polynesian ancestors. But in Hawaii, the word for tiki is
Ki'i.
And one of the most iconic ki'i forms is the carving of
Ku, who is one of the Hawaiian gods.
Here's the thing about Ku. His figure, because it was so popularly displayed in places like Bishop Museum, the largest museum in Hawaii with the world's largest collection of Polynesian cultural artifacts, Ku became famous in the US. Go to a Hawaiian tourist gift shop and you're likely to find Ku on everything from tiki mugs to keychains. But here's where tiki, or ki'i figures, like Ku, get a little complicated.
It also should be pointed out that Hawaiian people themselves in 1819 overthrew their own religion, and they burned or destroyed a lot of the existing ki'i from that time period, so there were very few left. And the ones that did survive were no longer considered to be sacred by the Hawaiians of that time period.
Though they're still very much important aspects of Hawaiian culture, ki'i figures perhaps don't mean the same thing as, say, tiki figures in New Zealand.
If you're displaying a carving and you're saying it's a tiki, is that a misuse? Is it an acceptable use? It's not a super easy answer. You're going to find a multitude of different opinions from different people throughout the Pacific.
Let's face it, tiki bars are complicated. But one thing's for sure, even though they're inspired by Pacific Islander cultures, it makes total sense that they were invented in Los Angeles, the city of movies and make-believe, a city that, in the 1930s, was growing into a melting pot of cultures as tiki bars started getting popular. They were also good for the economy. They gave a lot of jobs to people who maybe weren't able to find work elsewhere. This brings us back to the Tiki Ti in Los Angeles and its founder, Ray Buhin. Here's Ray's son, Mike.
My dad came here in 1930 from the Philippines, and what he did is he started working at the Figueroa Hotel downtown here. He was a bellhop, and he did that for about 6 months, and then they said, hey, Ray, we want you to work the elevator. So he became the elevator guy, and he used to joke around, hey, I'm moving on up. Then he got a job at the Beverly Hills Hotel. The manager told him, he says, Ray, Prohibition's ending. We want to send you to bartending school. He went to bartending school, and then when he got out, Don Gunn was opening up Don the Beachcomber. So he applied there, and he hired him. And that's how he got into tropical drinks.
That wasn't normal for Filipinos, was it, to have that kind of job? Or was
Filipinos back in the 30s and 40s made tropical drinks. They were the ones that started. They all became waiters, bartenders, busboys, and they were the backbone of tropical drinks at that time.
Ray was part of the first big wave of Filipino immigrants to the U.S. Because of restricted immigration laws, Filipino immigrants at the time were mostly men. And, like other people of color, they faced a lot of racism. This was the generation of manongs, or uncles, who came to LA in search of the American dream, but had to settle for something completely different instead. When they weren't working, they were in Little Manila, a poor neighborhood in downtown LA. With no Filipino women around, they went to taxi dance halls and danced with white women despite racial segregation laws. They were always in big groups, sometimes mistaken for gangs, when they were really just trying to avoid getting robbed or beaten or worse. Ray was one of these men, and despite the odds, he was able to find work in almost every famous tiki bar in LA. These places hired a lot of Filipino workers to do everything from serve food to carve ice sculptures. But Ray was first and foremost a bartender. His drinks were so famous that he was able to open a tiki bar of his own, the Tiki Ti, in 1961. Ray served many Hollywood stars over the years, like an up-and-coming director named George Lucas. The famous cantina scene in Star Wars, where Han Solo shot first, was supposedly based on Ray's bar, the Tiki Ti, and Ray was the basis for the character Yoda.
The data must have been erased.
But life wasn't all glitz and glamour for Ray Buhin. Even if he worked at the top tiki places in town, he couldn't sit with his white wife at places that didn't serve mixed couples. He changed his last name to Buhin to make it sound more Western, and he didn't speak any Filipino languages in public, which wasn't unusual for Filipinos at the time. They wanted to blend in, not cause trouble, to make a good life for themselves and their families. At the same time, Hawaiians faced a lot of discrimination in their own islands. But like the historian DeSoto Brown says, a lot of Hawaiians ended up working in tiki bars because they were good for tourism. By some odd twist of fate or pop culture, the tiki phenomenon helped develop American interests in Hawaii and other Pacific islands, and it gave a small group of immigrants in Los Angeles the chance to make a living. As tiki bars got more popular, it wasn't uncommon to see other black and brown workers there. A 1947 feature in the Saturday Evening Post about Don the Beachcomber in Los Angeles says that the staff at the time was a mixture of Filipinos, Chinese, Mexicans, and African Americans. It wasn't unusual for black and brown people to stand in for other black and brown people back then. It happened a lot in the movies, and it actually still happens today. But what's interesting is that all of this was happening during a time of racial segregation, before civil rights, before anyone really knew what cultural appropriation was about. The tiki bar scene has changed a lot since Ray Buhin first started mixing drinks. He passed away in 1999, but his son Mike Buhin is continuing the family business. Mike's son and a family friend work the bar, while he mans the door and works the room.
Really? I enjoy bartending and people. I get tired of the preparation. Yeah, that's a lot of work. People don't realize the work that goes into making the tropical drinks.
Mike is used to the nightlife. He grew up around it, with his father.
I remember going to all the places he worked when I was a kid and sitting down and because there was restaurants, so you could get in there. And I'd sit down and I go, hey, there's my dad in back of the bar. And he'd come over and say hi and talk to my mom and myself and my sister. And, that was it, because he worked a lot of places.
When they opened the Tiki Ti, Mike's father, Ray, incorporated their Filipino side into some of their drinks and decor.
Those are, because my dad, being Filipino, he made some of the drinks, with a Tagalog.
That's Tagalog, a Filipino dialect. Some of the drinks at the Tiki Ti have Tagalog names, and Ray also invented some of them. Like the Bayanihan, a coconut pineapple drink whose name means togetherness. I like the Chief Lapu-Lapu, which is a citrus punch named after the first hero of the Philippines, who resisted Spanish colonization and killed the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Basically, Lapu-Lapu was a pioneer, kind of like Ray Buchan, and a lot of those first Filipinos in LA, the original Tiki bartenders. It's a Sunday afternoon, and I'm at a Don the Beachcomber in Huntington Beach. It's about an hour south of Los Angeles, and it's the last remaining location. The original Don the Beachcomber in Hollywood closed ages ago. I meet up with Marlena Vaifale, a Samoan woman I met at the Orange County Pacific Islander Festival that took place in a nearby park. I asked Marlena if she's been here before.
No, I have not been here before. This is actually my first time being in a tiki bar.
Any general thoughts?
When I walked in, it does definitely have the island vibe. I see the tapa cloths, the coconut, and then the pandanus weaving that we use for the mats. I see several wooden clubs. It's not really authentic.
Though it looks a bit run down, and you can hear the Pacific Coast Highway sounds from the open doors, this place has all the makings of a tiki bar. On one side is a big mural of a beach landscape with two Polynesian-looking women. In the far corner is a glass cabinet with a giant collection of tiki mugs on display. And when Marlena's drink arrives, it's served in a glass with an orchid on top.
So this is the Island Voodoo cocktail. Kind of looks like a unblended Mai Tai. So let's see how it tastes. You can definitely taste the rum, and I can taste the pineapple. So, it does taste good. But then again, any liquor you give me, it'll taste good.
For most people, it's pretty obvious that tiki bars are not accurate representations of what Pacific culture truly is. But that doesn't mean Marlena can't appreciate a good tiki cocktail.
So I can definitely see people coming here for the drinks. But for me, being a Pacific Islander, I can appreciate the tiki bar in the sense that people can come and enjoy the drinks and have an idea of what the island culture is about, but they don't really get the entire thing.
If you want to sing, just write down your name and a song or whatever you're close to.
So it's karaoke.
While we were talking, the front of the bar was turned into a karaoke stage, and now the karaoke show is in full swing, and the place is packed.
People have their own way of having fun, so. It just happens to be in a tiki bar.
A somewhat more diverse crowd has gathered, though it's predominantly older and white. They all seem to know each other, and they're pretty good at karaoke. By this time, the other rooms have opened up. A reggae band plays in one. A big family gathers for an early dinner in another. Don the Beachcomber is no longer a celebrity hotspot or a tiki experience. It's just a neighborhood restaurant and bar that just so happens to be a tiki bar.
We have a song by Mr. Frank Sinatra. Hey, keep it down. We don't want to disturb the reggae people.
Before reporting on this story, I had actually never been to a real tiki bar, and admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of tiki drinks, but I've gained a greater appreciation for them. At the same time, I learned about the tiki bar's roots in cultural appropriation. It isn't just about taking things from one culture and reinterpreting it. That's been done for generations. The issue is who benefits from it, how it's used, who gets exploited and disrespected. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy a Mai Tai on a beach in Hawaii or stop by a tiki bar in LA. But after learning about the real culture tiki bars came from, about Hawaii and the Pacific, about tiki's little-known Filipino history, about the racial and social factors that created the tiki experience, I found that there's plenty of room to understand the true origins of tiki. I've still got a lot to learn, but so far, this experience has been worth way more than a trip to a tiki bar. A version of the story originally aired on Offshore podcast in 2017. You can listen to the original piece on the Offshore website and find more information, including this story and photos, at longdistanceradio.com. All right. Okay. Hey, it's me. And I have something to ask you. So, this is the last episode of Long Distance Season 1. Thank you so much for listening and for staying with us all season. Normally at this point, I'd read the credits and then share scenes from the next episode with you. But this is it. This is the end of Season 1. So there is no next episode yet. So what happens next? Team Long Distance, aka Patrick and I, are jumping into production on Season 2. So stay tuned and stay subscribed to our podcast feed because we'll be sharing updates and bonus episodes until we finally drop the next season soon. And while we work on Season 2, we need your help. We're starting a Patreon to build the future of Long Distance. And I'm here to tell you what that is and why you should join us. With help from Patrick.
Sup?
Here we go. On the show's first episode, I told you about my long-distance story, how I grew up in the diaspora, and how I'm not alone. Filipinos make up one of the largest diaspora populations in the world, but our stories are rarely covered in mainstream media. We have a rich tradition of narrative storytelling and radio, but we don't always see or hear stories that accurately reflect our transnational, multicultural, and complex experiences. I made Long Distance to help tell stories about our community. It's a podcast for us, by us.
FUBU.
Since Long Distance launched in October 2018, we've been featured in Apple Podcasts New and Noteworthy, Spotify Podcasts, Rappler, Fast Company, Bello Collective's 100 Outstanding Podcasts of 2018, and Long Distance was selected as one of 6 teams out of 6,000 applications from over 100 countries to be part of the inaugural Google Podcast Creator Program with PRX. We received seed funding and training to help us further develop Long Distance and to begin production on a second season.
And we've received some amazing and heartfelt messages and reviews from you, our long distance listeners. Thanks.
But it takes a lot of time, money, and effort to make a narrative documentary-style podcast like Long Distance. Plus, there's all the marketing and business stuff that comes with making an independent podcast.
And because podcasting is still growing, we're producing videos and short documentaries to reach new audiences and highlight important elements in our stories.
Here's the thing. Our dream is to make Long Distance for you guys forever, and to fund Long Distance production beyond just one more season, to make it a truly sustainable podcast that will last for many seasons to come. This is what the Patreon is for.
Basically, Patreon is a membership platform where you can support us each month as we make long distance.
Your monetary support will help cover our production and business costs and allow us to focus more of our time and energy on making the show. For your help, you'll gain membership benefits like early access to episodes, online podcasting and storytelling workshops, and limited edition long-distance swag.
If you like what we're doing and want to see where we take this,
become a Long Distance Radio Club member, supporter, or ambassador. All it takes is a monthly contribution equivalent to
a cup of coffee,
a couple cans of Spam,
or a piece of avocado toast.
We have more information about our Patreon campaign, including how to join and a cool video directed and produced by Patrick.
That's me.
On patreon.com/longdistanceradio. We'll also link to this on our podcast website, longdistanceradio.com.
Hey, Paula.
Sup?
Long Distance will always stay free on our listeners' favorite podcast platforms and at longdistanceradio.com, along with our mini documentaries, right?
Right. So if you don't become a member, nothing will change for you. But if you like what we've made for you this past season, consider joining our Patreon. If you do and our membership grows enough through Patreon, then we can grow Long Distance into something more than a podcast, a community, and you'll be right there with us. It's been a wild journey since I began this project in 2016, but we're just getting started. This show wouldn't be here without you, and I truly, truly, truly appreciate your support. I hope you'll join us in this new and exciting chapter of Long Distance.
And don't forget to follow us on all the socials. # Long Distance Radio on Twitter, @Long Distance Radio on Instagram and Facebook.
Thanks, Patrick.
No problem.
And thank you for listening.
Hey, baby, won't you come along with me? And I will show you, baby, that only you and I could see.
This episode was written, mixed, and produced by me, Paola Mardo. Producer is Patrick Epino. Cover art is by Celina Calma, with title design by me. Theme song is by Sea Light and the Prisms. Music in this episode is by Benjamin Rogers, Blue Dot Sessions, Deanne Key, Hawaiian Trio, Electric Kulintang, The Kinks, and Les Baxter. Special thanks to my parents, Patricia Mardo and Alfonso Mardo, and to Jessica Terrell, April Estrion, Elena Dugdale, and Patty Epler of Honolulu Civil Beat. That's it. For now. Thanks again for listening. More soon.